Whoop. Sorry, let me get out of this here because it's blocking everybody. Oh, there we go. We took the summer off from the Business Matters chats, and everybody's got a lot of things to do, and we said we would resume in September. So I'm happy that now that September's here, we can get back together and do these again. So how the process works, if you haven't joined us before, we've got our guest speaker with us, and Anna monitors a chat box. So as our speaker's talking, if you think there are questions you might have, this isn't an open forum where you jump in, but if we ask that you shoot your questions to Anna through the chat box, and we'll get to as many as we can, if not all of them, before this time is up. So we really try to wrap this up around 2:45. If we run over a few minutes because we have some questions, we'll do that, but not to worry. So we'll be timely with everything. So today I'm pleased to have with us Trevor Jung, who is the new transit manager for the city of Racine. In this role, Trevor acts as the city of Racine's liaison with the Federal Transit Administration, the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, and the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission and other transit-related entities. Trevor also provides policy guidance on multimodal transportation, oversees the Bell Urban Transit budget, good luck with that, coordinates public transit planning, and carries out strategic initiatives related to the modernization and sustainability of Racine's transportation system. Many of you know, before taking the role, Trevor was a two-term alderman here in Racine, Racine Common Council, chairing the Transit Commission, and he worked at Carthage College, engaging in nonprofit and government employer relations. He sits on a few boards. One is the All Aboard Wisconsin, 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin, and the steering committee for the Academies of Racine at RUSD. Trevor earned his bachelor's degree in urban studies from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee with an emphasis on urban planning. So help me welcome Trevor Jung, the transit manager for the city of Racine. Trevor, it's all yours.
Thank you, Matt, and great to see so many familiar faces today. Before jumping into a conversation about transportation specifically, I just want to provide some context around what does it mean to have transit in Racine. So Racine is, on the coast of Lake Michigan, right between Chicago and Milwaukee, which means that we're in the third largest economic region in the United States of America, and we're in the 10th largest economic region in the world. So when we're talking about transportation, from street to street and from block to block is important, but we also have to think big and think about how we can be better integrated in the region so that we can attract talent to Racine and make sure that folks have access to opportunity, not just in one municipality, but regionally, north and south in this corridor. And so, Racine's a special place. You have, historic architecture, you have Frank Lloyd Wright, you have a diverse population. We speak over 40 languages in our schools. It is a metropolitan community in a cosmopolitan region. And so we have to think big and get away from just talking about how do we maintain basic services and think about how do we modernize a system to meet the needs of the 21st century. So one of the things that I want to talk about today is the status of transportation in Racine and then looking ahead. So the status of transportation in Racine is interesting pre-COVID versus post-COVID. So as we know, COVID-19 has had a dramatic impact on every single sector of our daily lives. And the same is true about transportation. So when I share numbers of the transit system, I'm really going to focus on 2019 and then talk about our efforts to normalize those numbers and bring them back to pre-pandemic. So on an average year, we have about 1 million individual rides on the bus system. So you've probably heard before in conversations in Racine, like, oh, nobody rides the bus. But at the end of the day, we need to be informed by data and talk about how we can best provide services to the folks who utilize the system now, and how do we make sure that we're doing a better job for those who look at the system and say, this doesn't meet my needs. And so that in large part is why I'm excited about being here today, to have a conversation with the business community around how we can best meet the needs of employers in the region. So we also are excited about partnership. I see some folks from Racine Unified School District on the call. And it's so critical to make sure that students can get to school. It's so critical to make sure that workers can get to jobs. It's critical to make sure that patients can get to healthcare. And so if we can use the transit system as a means to make sure we break down transportation barriers, that is our goal. So breaking down transportation barriers is number one, but number two, also attracting the next generation of talent. You have folks who are moving to larger cities that provide a variety of transportation options. And Matt mentioned in the introduction multimodal transportation. It's great to have roads to drive your cars on. It's also great to be able to say, hey, I want to ride my bike to work. I want to choose a different form of transportation that meets my needs. And so young folks are moving to areas that provide those different amenities. And so we need to recognize that and make sure that we can provide services that the next generation of talent is looking for. And so I'm really excited for this conversation today because I know that a lot of the struggles that we've been talking about are shared across this call for many different folks. And so some exciting news coming out of the transit system is some of the innovations that we're working on. We had a great question come in from Rod French, who's on the call, about how do we stay competitive with Uber, Lyft, and these new forms of transportation that are flexible, but also expensive. And so how are we making sure that as a bus system and has hopefully a multimodal transportation system, this is not just a transportation option of last resort, but it's something that people can choose to do because it's the sustainable way to get to point A to point B, and it works for them. And so a big word that comes to mind is modernization. We need to have a modern transportation system. If we're doing the same thing that we did 10 years ago, today, we're not doing something right. If somebody in the business community said, hey, we haven't changed a thing from 10 years ago to today, chances are they'd be talking to you about why they're no longer in business. So you consistently have to grow and alter with what the demands are of the time. And so that's the plan in the city of Racine. We're working with a firm called Connections to make sure that if you're a customer of the Bell Urban Transit System or RIDE, you know exactly where the bus you're looking for is, you know exactly when it's going to arrive at your stop, and you can choose to walk out to where you need to go based on that information. Knowledge is power, and knowledge is also convenience. And to Rod's question, a lot of the transportation options are based on what's most convenient for me. And so we have to make sure that we recognize that as a transit system. So that's number one, using that type of analytics and data to inform riders about how they can best approach the bus system. Number two is actually having vehicles that are sleek, new, exciting. So we actually have 9 electric buses coming online starting in November, going into December as they're being shipped from Proterra. So having this electric buses that are from 2021 is going to be an attraction to the system. And not only that, it's going to save money on energy, and we're integrating it into a solar array system that we hope to install in the coming years to make sure that we're 100% renewable in our efforts. And so thinking into the future, we're making sure that our capital is modern. We're making sure that we're sharing information with our customers. And thirdly, what I hope to really prioritize is communication with stakeholders, which is why when Anna reached out, I was very excited to participate in this, because I think we're going to do a better job as a public service if we communicate with those utilizing our services, and we communicate with those who are in charge of systems, organizations that benefit from having access to that type of service. And so that's why I'm excited about the questions that are going to pop in the chat today. Let's see. Something else, we've got really 3 categories that were priorities of the mayor that I want to share with everybody today, which is number 1, multimodal. Pedestrian infrastructure, bicycle infrastructure, mass transit, infrastructure for vehicular movement. It's an all of the above approach. We're not going to be a competitive region unless we take that approach. Number 2, modernization. What are we doing about the technology that we're using on our system to make sure that we're meeting the needs of those using our system and attracting new users. And then 3, regional. We talked about this. Being right between Milwaukee and Chicago, we should be having conversations with those communities to see how we can best integrate and to advocate for the region. Here you have about 25% of the entire states of Wisconsin's population in these 3 counties. But you also have a community, you also have a region that, based on its scale compared to other regions in the United States, is relatively underserved when it comes to regional transportation. So what can we do to advocate at the state level to make sure that we have infrastructure investments that meet the needs of the economy and grow Racine, Kenosha, and Milwaukee? I think this is a big topic that many folks have talked about, which is the city of Racine's proximity to the interstate. Racine is the largest city in the Midwest, furthest away from an interstate highway system. That's a major disadvantage. It's almost like a missing tooth in the corridor. And so what can we do to make sure that we compensate for that lack of connection to that critical infrastructure? So these are the kind of things that I want to chat about today. And I hope we can shoot messages back and forth and just have an open conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. My first question, you did hit on it a tiny bit, but I think we should expand just a little bit, because Rod did send a question in ahead of time, and he kind of asked about Uber and Lyft being a little, more expensive option than the bus. So so maybe just get a little more specific with how can Racine create, or how will maybe Racine create cost-effective transportation so people can work and shop?
That's a great question. So there are 2 models for route planning that transit systems subscribe to. So there's the coverage model, which is we've got this X area that we need to make sure that our bus system serves, right? So there could be 4 people on the corner of this square and 40 people on the other corner. But because of this coverage model, we are treating that equally. But then there's also the ridership model. What are we doing to make sure that we're connecting 2 major nodes? If we have a large, residential development like the Horlick factory site that's being redeveloped, and you're going to have thousands, or about 1,000 or so residential units that are going to be created there after it's completely developed. How is that going to impact our route system, right? And where are those routes going to connect folks to? So we've got major suburbanized employment. We've got residential development happening in the city. And it's honestly quite interesting because you're thinking about this in reverse in the Racine area. So you've got, back in the day, the city of Racine as this major hub for employment and manufacturing, and you had suburbanized residential communities that were able to get opportunities in the city. And now what you're seeing, because of the development of the interstate corridor and the suburbanization of jobs nationally, you're seeing Racine now become a residential community, and these types of employment opportunities existing in this suburban environment. And so how can we best use that information that we have around destinations that folks want to get to, where people are living, and how can we provide that effectively and conveniently, where we're empowering riders with the information that they need to be able to plan their trips? Because it's, there's a Tom Petty song, "The waiting is the hardest part," right? That's very true about the bus system. Who wants to sit on a corner in the middle of winter for 40 minutes, not knowing when the bus is going to arrive? I would hope to find another form of transit if I couldn't plan my trip accordingly. So to be able to provide that information is really going to make a difference for riders and attract new riders, like we were saying earlier.
Yeah, when I read about that, I thought that was great, because when you go, a lot of subways, if you go somewhere that has that kind of transportation, hey, your train is coming in 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, and then you're like, oh yay, here it comes. So I think that is great to get up to this century or this decade or whatever you want to say, this decade maybe. So let's talk about those electric buses. You said there's 9 of them.
Yes.
Can I just be really blunt? So how did that get paid for? Where did that money come from?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah.
Anna, thank you for that question. So have any of you heard about the Volkswagen controversy where they lied on their diesel emissions?
Oh,
So
yeah.
yeah, so that was huge news. And off the record, I actually drive a Volkswagen, but it's not the diesel car. So so I have a Volkswagen in my driveway. But the lawsuit that resulted in that manufacturing company lying on their emissions actually resulted in billions of dollars nationally going towards green infrastructure and specifically transit programming. And so we were able, through that settlement, to completely pay for this modernization of our bus fleet. So the city of Racine, along with our surrounding partners, only pay about 35% of the operating budget for the bus system. The rest comes from the state government, the federal government, these types of settlements, and fares from folks who are actually utilizing the system. So, we want to make sure that we have a diversified income stream to support the system and be responsible for taxpayer dollars while at the same time thinking in the future and using grant opportunities to really modernize the system.
Cool. So somebody asked, are they adding to the fleet? Are you replacing? How many are in? Hey, how many are in the fleet? I mean, I don't know that.
Yeah, so we have a max capacity for about 45 buses. And so we tend to run about 40. And so this is a large replacement. This is probably the biggest the city of Racine has seen in modern times.
And then you mentioned, okay, so electric, I don't fully understand the whole thing. I don't have an electric car, although I do have a tiny car. So they have to be plugged in somewhere. And so like, what are the other things that kind of need to be done to accommodate for this new part of the fleet?
Great question. So there's charging infrastructure that needs to be installed. There's conversations with We Energies that need to be had about the consumption of that type of energy on the grid. And so that's going to be a big part of it. Kara Pratt, who's our sustainability coordinator, has been working on the solar side of things. We have a facilities assessment being done to see if the roof of the transit garage can actually hold those solar panels, because we want that information before we move forward with any type of installation. And so, the priority is how can we make sure that we save taxpayer dollars, engage in sustainability, and provide excellent service.
Great. That's all really, really interesting to me, because just personal side note, I have solar panels on my house, so it's all like fascinating to me. So what about drivers? I mean, all the talk that all the businesses have about hiring and retaining, how is it going with hiring and retaining actual bus drivers?
That's a really good question. So, this is week 2.5 for me, but the conversations that I've had with our operations manager has indicated a similar struggle. But at the bus system, we're actually pretty proud of the diversity and the residency of our drivers. So let me see if I can pull up the numbers here. So we have about 79 staff in the bus system, excluding City Hall staff, which would just be me. So wish, we had a team of folks here, but that's okay. So we have, out of that 79, 72 of them live in the city of Racine. So we have local folks who are serving this community and making sure that they have access to those jobs. So out of that, just demographically, 40 are African Americans, that's 51%, 14 are Hispanic, that's about 18%, 25 are white, it's about 32%. So it's a representative, cross-section of the community who has access to these jobs, who has the training to work as bus drivers, and who are living in this community and serving this community. So I think even just thinking about this as the context of an employer, providing a public service, we want to make sure that we're providing jobs for folks who live in our home. So the retention is something that we're thinking about in the next budget. What can we do to keep bus drivers employed and stay in the city? Because I know that you could make a lot of money with a license like that driving. And so we have to think about how we can be competitive, but those are ongoing conversations.
Great. Yeah, that was not my question. It was a great question. There is, let's see, one other bus question that I kind of skipped over. Let's get to that, and then I'll get to a longer one. So are you envisioning on-demand bus service? So again, Rod, if you need to expand on that, please do, but are you envisioning on-demand bus service?
So
Trevor was talking about being able to know when your bus is coming.
Yeah.
The next step to that would be able to request the bus, which is
Gotcha. Okay.
Uber and Lyft model. So I don't
Gotcha.
know whether that's down the road, whether that's even possible with the territory you have to cover. I was just curious about that.
Sure, that's a great question, Rod. So we provide a service called paratransit, which is actually quite popular for folks who are disabled, for senior citizens, to be able to call on demand and request a bus. You might see the DART vehicles driving around. That's an on-demand service. And so, are we going to expand that service? That's another budget conversation. Is there a possibility to do on-demand, like large set buses? I don't think that that's necessarily the model, because this is about volume. The more folks that you have on the bus, the more bang you get for your buck. So that individual request might not meet that type of system. But there, information is power. So providing that information to folks who are choosing to ride the bus system is going to be helpful in their choice to decide whether or not to jump on.
Makes sense. Buses, hot topic. Let me get to Ron Tatum's question. I am curious about route and boundary concerns for students specifically. Boundaries change each year, causing transportation barriers to families and students.
Right.
Especially in minority communities. Will there be more routes available and accessible to those communities, and will the cost be affordable?
That's a great question, Ron. I appreciate that. As far as I know, anytime the City of Racine transit system works with our municipal partners, works with Racine Unified School District, the first conversation we have are, what are your needs for this service? Really, I think about it as clients. The Village of Mount Pleasant is a client of this service. Racine Unified School District is a client of this service. So working with them and having a strong partnership with them to identify, what their needs are certainly informs our routes, especially when we're talking about students getting to school. Like I said in the onset of the conversation, this is about workers getting to jobs. This is about students getting to school. This is about patients getting to care. And so we need to be in constant communication with those systems that provide that in order to provide the best service. And I can tell you, just from a values perspective, making sure that no matter where you live in Eastern Racine County, we want to make sure that folks have access to school, and we don't want transit to be a barrier. And Racine Unified in the past has been wonderful at working, as from what I've heard from my predecessor, has been wonderful working in partnership. And now that COVID, hopefully, we've got students who are in the building again, we can have those conversations once again about making sure that students have that access.
Mm-hmm. I have a question about the bird scooters that I will get to, but we're going to stay on a little bit of buses. So you mentioned kind of this reverse, moving people from the city out away from the city to other villages, communities. So how do you, okay, let me read it over. Sorry. You mentioned about the reverse need of moving City of Racine residents out to the interstate businesses. How do you envision this occurring? Because do the buses go across the border into Mount Pleasant, or do they stop?
They do. They
Yeah.
do. So we have multiple. Actually, this is a fun fact. We do not have a single route that stays in the city of Racine's borders.
Okay.
So
That's a
that
good
is,
fact.
yeah. So that's a fun fact. And what that means is that cooperation with our neighbors is critically important to making sure that people have access to those services, opportunities, being able to shop, etc. So obviously, none of our lives exist based on municipal boundaries.
Mhm.
And so we have to acknowledge that and collaborate with our partners. So we're having conversations right now with, starting to engage in conversations now with Mount Pleasant, Caledonia, and Yorkville, who have an agreement with the transit system for Eastern Racine County. And routes are certainly parts of those conversations.
Good. So my question about the birds. So if all of you out there don't know, they're those little scooter thingies that you see people buzzing around. I happen to live right by the beach and they are all over the place by that area of town. How is that going? Is there a contract? Is it going to be ongoing? Was this a test of those scooters? How are things going? What kind of data do you have from those?
Great question. Bird scooters are a little different than the transit system, but when we talk about multimodal transportation and all of the above strategy, that definitely needs to be a part of the conversation, right? And so Bird Scooters is a private corporation that reached out to the city of Racine and said, I think that there could be exciting partnership between the municipality and our company to be able to provide this in the city of Racine. So really it's a private company that it was talking about moving into the city of Racine and said like, hey, do you have any ordinances on the books regulating what this looks like? And so the city of Racine wrote what the ordinance codes would be for folks who are using bird scooters. What are the rules associated with that? And so, ideally folks follow those rules, like parking, not riding on the sidewalk, parking their devices upright, etc. We've seen pretty good ridership on those scooters. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but to your initial question, Anna, is this a pilot? Is this ongoing? This is a pilot right now for the city council to make that judgment at the end of the agreement to see if this is something that we want to continue. So there will be conversations about how has it served our community? Are people taking advantage of it? Is it becoming a safety issue? Is it expanding people's access and freedom of movement? And those will be assessed as we get closer to that period.
Great. That was the exact answer I was looking for. I was very curious about that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I was at lunch at the Red Onion the other day and I was running late to 1 o'clock. And so I jumped on a bird scooter and went from the Red Onion back to City Hall. So
There you go.
it works
Very
for
cool.
me.
Very cool. I know we were a little heavy on the bus side of things. There are no other questions in the queue. So when we think about, okay, we just talked about buses, bird scooters. So let's go to trains. I know you personally are and have been a heavy supporter of let's get this KRM thing going. So let's talk a little bit about that. Where, who, what, where, when, how, what's going on with our KRM, if that's even what it should be called still.
Yeah, well, that's a great question, Anna. So as we were talking about earlier, the city of Racine is the largest city furthest away from an interstate highway system in the Midwest. One of our biggest challenges is not being connected to the region. So we have to think creatively about how can we be connected. If you look at the Hiawatha line, the Amtrak line, that has seen a steady increase in ridership over the past 10 years. And in the past 5 years, it's actually seen an 8% increase in ridership. So you see this demand for service to the point where there were investments for additional trains on that track. Now that service for Amtrak attracts a different population than a commuter service along the lakefront. So you've got to look at, getting from point A to point B, but you also have to look at transit-oriented development. For each dollar that is spent on rail infrastructure, you have a $5 return in your local economy. And so when you have an opportunity like we're seeing potentially out of Washington, having bipartisan support for major spending on infrastructure, we need to advocate for the city of Racine's needs. And be responsible to the taxpayer locally that we know wouldn't be able to bear the burden of that size of an investment. And so because this once in a generation conversation is happening in Washington, we need to do our part in advocating for that locally. There's been an attempt before, but we didn't have the same type of environment federally that we have now. And there's a big reason for that. The previous investments federally for infrastructure have been called shovel-ready projects. So largely they've been for how do we get the economy recharged in the shortest time possible. Now the philosophy from the federal government seems to be shovel-worthy projects. So what are investments that we can make federally into our local communities that have a long-term impact to make sure that we achieve certain elements of quality of life that we hope to achieve and economic growth in the long term. So regional transit and commuter rail, connecting downtown Chicago to downtown Milwaukee with downtown Racine as a stop would in no doubt be an economic benefit to the region. And now it's just a matter of advocacy and figuring out how we can partner with local, county, state, and federal entities to make this happen. This is a big deal. And so, and it's going to be extraordinarily complex and difficult, but I mean, why not try is, I think.
That's a very enlightening way to look at it. I appreciate that answer. Why not try? If you don't try, how the heck do you know if it will work or not?
Right. And the business community actually in the previous effort was such a huge part of that conversation. So, you saw Modine, Twin Disc, S.E. Johnson, InSyncerator all sign on to supporting this type of infrastructure investment. So this is not a partisan issue. This is actually a pro-growth issue.
Yes, absolutely. I would agree. Matt, we don't have any other questions in the queue. I don't know if you had any final questions yourself. Otherwise, we can.
I guess
moving.
I'll just open it up for one last round. If anybody does, you can pull yourself off mute and throw a question out to Trevor. We got a few minutes left. All right. Not seeing any. Well, Trevor, thank you very much. We appreciate your time today. I know you're a busy young man there and got your hands full, but good luck to you. I want to thank you for taking time out of your day. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Remind you that our next Business Matters chat will take place Wednesday, October 20th. We're still finalizing that with a speaker, and look for that announcement in the next couple of weeks. We'll get it out there so you can get registered for that. So if there are no further questions, thank you, everybody. Appreciate you joining us today, and we'll see you next month. Take
Great,
care.
thank you.
Here, Trevor.